Caleb Vance, a young boy with his father's serious eyes, spent the late afternoon in his bedroom, rolling his late father's treasured toy car across the worn rug. A peculiar, metallic rattle from deep within the miniature chassis broke the nostalgic quiet. He carefully pried open the car's base, revealing a small, tarnished key nestled amongst the plastic gears. Later that evening, the kitchen air hung heavy with the unspoken sadness that had become Eliza Vance's constant companion. A high school teacher, she moved through the motions of preparing a modest dinner, her mind replaying fragments of David's laughter, his gentle presence. 3 months since his sudden heart attack, and the quiet still felt deafening. "Mom, look." Caleb's voice, a tender echo of his father's, cut through her melancholic routine. He held out the small, tarnished key. Its dull glint, a jarring interruption to her quiet grief. Eliza took the key, her fingers tracing the tiny, barely visible etching on its head. A series of numbers, 147B, and a faint, stylized logo of a padlock. It wasn't a house key, nor any she recognized from David's modest collection. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Then a memory flickered. David, casually mentioning an extra space he'd rented years ago for some engineering projects. A place he said was just for his tinkering. Eliza had dismissed it as one of his endearing eccentricities. Now it felt like a breadcrumb leading into an unknown part of his life. The next morning, under an overcast sky, Eliza pulled her sensible sedan into the nondescript parking lot of a self-storage facility on the suburban outskirts. Each identical, corrugated steel door seemed to guard 1,000 secrets. Apprehension churned in her stomach, a mix of determination and a strange bewilderment. Was this really David's doing? The mild-mannered engineer, the loving husband, the devoted father. What could he possibly have hidden here? She found Unit 147B. The heavy steel door, impersonal and cold, felt like a barrier not just to a storage unit, but to a part of David she'd never known. Her hand trembled slightly as she inserted the key. Eliza pushed the heavy storage unit door open, the sound echoing in the sterile hallway. Stepping inside, she braced herself for dusty boxes of old holiday decorations or forgotten sentimental items. Instead, her breath hitched. This was no ordinary storage unit. Before her lay a meticulously organized, if dusty, hidden office. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A sturdy desk held a desktop computer, and a large whiteboard dominated the far end, covered in complex diagrams and handwritten notes. Eliza's gaze swept across the unfamiliar space, a profound sense of disorientation washing over her. This isn't David's life, she thought, her mind struggling to reconcile this clandestine operation with her mild-mannered husband. Who was he really? Her eyes landed on a prominent, brightly colored file tab, stark against the beige of the cabinet. It read in bold, stark lettering, Riverbend School District Board Fraud Investigation. The words hit her like a physical blow, shattering the last fragments of her perception of David. A gasp escaped her lips, quiet in the cavernous space. Her world tilted on its axis. Hours later, the dust motes danced in the single shaft of light filtering through a high vent. Eliza was no longer disoriented. She was furious. Piles of papers surrounded her. Each document, a brick in a wall of deceit David had painstakingly deconstructed. Invoices for non-existent school equipment. Inflated shipping costs for items that were never delivered. Intricate webs of shell companies with names like Riverbend Logistics Solutions and Thorne and Sterling Shipping Partners. It was all there, laid bare. She traced a finger across a detailed flowchart on the whiteboard, a diagram illustrating a scheme so audacious, so complex, it stole her breath. Millions of dollars, meant for textbooks, technology, and teachers' salaries, siphoned off through a sophisticated shipping insurance scam. The names of high-ranking board members, Principal Sterling and Chairwoman Thorne, were circled, highlighted, and connected by arrows to offshore accounts and fictitious companies. Disgust curdled in Eliza's stomach. This wasn't just corruption. It was a parasitic enterprise, feeding on the very community she served, the children she taught. The weight of the truth settled on her, heavy and unforgiving. The day turned to dusk, painting the small office in shades of bruised purple and gray. Eliza, her eyes burning from strain and unshed tears, found a leather-bound journal tucked beneath a stack of financial statements. David's familiar handwriting, neat and precise, filled the pages. As she read, his voice, so long silenced, echoed in her mind. Asterisk, August 14th. The numbers don't lie. This isn't incompetence. It's deliberate. Thorne and Sterling are at the heart of it. They're bleeding the district dry. Eliza's hands trembled. David had known. He had been living with this secret, alone. Asterisk, September 29th. A veiled warning from Sterling today. Loose ends get tied up, David. He thinks I'm naive. He thinks I'll back down. He doesn't know what I'm fighting for. Tears streamed down Eliza's face, blurring the words. He was afraid, but resolute. He had faced threats, insidious and chilling, all to protect their family. Asterisk, October 12th. I've started encrypting everything. If anything happens to me, Eliza needs to know. Caleb needs to know. They deserve the truth. This isn't just about money. It's about justice. And I won't let them win. The journal fell open to the last entry, unfinished. The chilling realization struck her. David's sudden cardiac arrest, the official cause of death, might not have been natural at all. A cold shadow, far more sinister than grief, began to loom. Late that night, the storage unit documents were spread across Eliza's coffee table, transforming her cozy living room into a crime scene. She reviewed David's medical reports, the official explanation of his, quote, sudden and severe cardiac event now ringing hollow. Inconsistencies jumped out at her. A perfectly healthy man, no family history, no prior symptoms, suddenly gone. It didn't add up. Her mind raced, connecting dots she hadn't dared to before. Principal Sterling's overly solicitous calls after David's passing, his insistence on helping her navigate the district's death benefits, now seemed like a grotesque performance. And Chairwoman Thorne's dismissive attitude at the funeral, a cold, calculating gaze that had dismissed Eliza as little more than an inconvenience. They knew, Eliza thought, a slow, burning anger igniting within her. They knew David was onto them, and they silenced him. The photos of Principal Sterling and Chairwoman Thorne, now printed and tacked to a makeshift whiteboard on her living room wall, stared back at her. Their faces, once symbols of authority, now appeared as masks of corruption. The grief she had carried, a dull ache, sharpened into a fierce, unwavering determination. She would uncover the truth. For David. For Caleb. Eliza stood in Caleb's bedroom, the soft glow of his nightlight casting long shadows on the wall. She watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling with the innocent rhythm of childhood. The documents on the coffee table in the living room, a silent burden, felt heavier than ever. David's secret, his brave investigation, had not only cost him his life but now threatened to consume hers and Caleb's. If she remained silent, the corrupt board would continue to siphon funds meant for their schools, for their children's education, for their future, and if she spoke up, what then? The anonymous threats, the subtle intimidations David had faced, they would turn their ruthless gaze on her. But as she gently touched Caleb's soft hair, a different kind of strength surged through her. A mother's strength. A fierce, primal instinct to protect. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a guardian. David had fought for them, and now it was her turn. The board had underestimated David, seeing him as a mild-mannered engineer. They would make the same mistake with her, a quiet high school teacher. But they would learn. A mother's love, fueled by intellect and an unyielding demand for justice, was a force far more formidable than any corrupt empire. The first rays of dawn peeked through Caleb's window, painting the room in hues of soft orange and pink. It was not just a new day. It was the beginning of a new chapter for Eliza Vance. Eliza Vance clutched the worn folder to her chest, the documents within feeling heavier than their paperweight. The small, slightly cluttered law office of Marcus Thorne, nestled in a quieter corner of Riverbend, offered little solace. But it was a beginning. Marcus, a man whose reputation for taking on the impossible preceded him, looked up from his messy desk, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice even, "I understand you have concerns about the school district. Many people do. But if this is about budget cuts or the new curriculum, I'm afraid my firm specializes in something a bit more substantial. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she laid the folder on his desk. It's about my husband, David, she said, her voice soft but firm, and what he found before he died. Marcus leaned back, a flicker of skepticism in his eyes. David Vance, mild-mannered engineer, sudden cardiac arrest. Tragic. But Mrs. Vance, grief can play tricks on the mind. Are you certain this isn't grief-fueled paranoia? Eliza met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a quiet conviction that belied her anxious posture. He left me a key, Mr. Thorne, to a secret office filled with evidence. He wasn't mild-mannered. He was a man fighting for justice. Marcus sighed, then reached for the folder. His professional curiosity finally piqued. All right, Mrs. Vance. Let's see what David Vance was truly fighting for. Hours later, Marcus Thorne's office was a battlefield of documents. Piles of invoices, bank statements, and shell company registrations covered every surface, illuminated by the harsh glow of his desk lamp. The initial skepticism had vanished from Marcus's face, replaced by a grim realization. He looked up at Eliza, who sat opposite him, her exhaustion warring with a fierce resolve. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice grave. This isn't just local corruption. This is a meticulously orchestrated, multi-million-dollar shipping insurance fraud scheme. David didn't just stumble onto something. He meticulously dismantled it piece by piece. Eliza's chest tightened, a cold dread mixing with a strange sense of vindication. Who's behind it? Marcus leaned forward, his expression hardening. The architect appears to be Chairwoman Thorne. No relation, thankfully. And the chief enforcer ensuring compliance and silencing dissent is Principal Sterling. They've built an empire of greed, Mrs. Vance, and they won't hesitate to protect it. They are powerful, ruthless, and deeply entrenched. The weight of his words hung in the air, a chilling confirmation of the danger David had faced. Eliza felt a surge of fear, but beneath it, a steel-edged determination. David had known this, and he had fought. She would too. Marcus saw it in her eyes. This won't be easy, he warned. But I'm in. We'll need to be smarter, more discreet, and far more patient than they are. The next morning, Eliza walked into her classroom, the fluorescent lights feeling harsher than usual. The hum of student chatter and the scent of chalk dust were familiar anchors, but a new, unsettling current ran beneath the surface of her day. She felt watched. The feeling solidified when Principal Sterling made an unannounced appearance, his usual boisterous cheer replaced by an overly solicitous tone that set Eliza's teeth on edge. "Eliza, my dear," he began, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Just checking in. How are you holding up? It's been a difficult time since David's passing. Such a tragedy." He paused, his gaze lingering on her for a beat too long. "You know, David was a private man, kept to himself. Any unfinished business he might have left? Or perhaps you're just struggling to cope with everything?" The implication was clear. He was probing, hinting at her vulnerability, subtly suggesting she was unraveling. Eliza forced a tight smile. "I'm managing, Principal Sterling. And David left... No, unfinished business. That concerns anyone but me and Caleb." Her voice was calm, but inside, a defiant fire ignited. She knew what this was. A test. A veiled warning. They knew she was poking around. The principal's smile tightened, his eyes flicking away for a moment before returning, a predatory glint in their depths. "Of course. Just looking out for our teachers. And for Caleb. Such a bright boy. Wouldn't want anything to disrupt his future, would we?" The threat hung unspoken in the air, a chilling echo of David's own journal entries. Eliza's resolve hardened. They had just made it personal. Late that evening, Eliza and Caleb sat hunched over David's old laptop in her home office, the glow of the screen illuminating their focused faces. Eliza wrestled with encrypted files, the complex coding of foreign language. "He was brilliant," she murmured, frustration tinging her voice. "But I just can't make sense of these layers." Caleb, quiet but intensely observant, leaned closer. "Dad called this his puzzle box, Mom." said it was designed to only open if you knew how he thought. His fingers, nimble and confident, danced across the keyboard. Lines of code scrolled past. A blur to Eliza, but Caleb's eyes tracked them with effortless understanding. He used a modified RSA encryption. Caleb explained, his voice calm, with a multi-factor key based on family dates. Smart. He typed a few more commands, and suddenly a torrent of data flooded the screen. Communication logs, hidden folders, encrypted messages. He was trying to build a network of whistleblowers, Caleb whispered, his own eyes widening. And he knew they were watching him. Look here. Dead man's switch protocol activated. He programmed it to release critical data if he went silent for too long. Eliza stared, a mixture of awe and terror gripping her. David hadn't just been investigating. He'd been planning for his own demise, building a digital fortress to protect his family and expose the truth. Caleb looked up, his brow furrowed. He was scared, Mom. Really scared. Eliza pulled him closer, her heart aching with a renewed understanding of David's sacrifice. After Caleb had finally drifted off to sleep, Eliza stood in her living room, the scattered documents on the coffee table, a stark testament to the shadowy world David had inhabited. The quiet suburban house, once her sanctuary, now felt like a fragile shell. The danger was real, palpable, a living thing that had already stolen her husband and now circled her and Caleb. She could walk away. She could try to disappear, to protect Caleb from the ruthless power of Chairwoman Thorne and Principal Sterling. But then, David's sacrifice would be in vain. His quiet determination, his unwavering commitment to justice, would be erased. She thought of his journal entries, the growing fear, but also the fierce resolve in his words to protect his family. David had faced this monster alone. Now, it was her turn. A grieving widow, a high school teacher, they saw her as weak, easily dismissed. But they didn't know the strength that came from a mother's love. The cold, resolute anger that pulsed through her veins now. David had given her the tools. Caleb, their son, possessed the insight to wield them. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about honoring David's legacy, about securing a future for Caleb where justice wasn't just a word, but a tangible reality. Eliza looked at the documents, no longer with fear, but with a plan forming in her mind, clear and sharp. The game had changed, and she was ready to play. The aroma of stale coffee and desperation usually clung to the staff lounge, but today, Eliza Vance felt a different kind of tension in the air. She stirred her lukewarm tea, watching her colleagues. Budget cuts had been brutal, hitting programs and staff alike. It's just strange, Eliza began, her voice casual, how some departments are gutted, but we're suddenly investing in new, top-of-the-line shipping insurance from a company no one's ever heard of. Brenda, a veteran history teacher whose weary eyes had seen decades of district politics, flinched. She glanced around the sterile room, where fluorescent lights hummed a low, disquieting tune. Honey Strange is the Riverbend School District's middle name these days, Brenda whispered, leaning closer. Principal Sterling's driving a new luxury SUV and Chairwoman Thorne? She micromanages every single contract now. People talk, you know. Whispers about favors and kickbacks, but nobody dares say it too loud. Eliza's gaze sharpened, her observant eyes catching Brenda's nervous fidgeting. The corruption wasn't just David's secret. It was an open wound, festering in plain sight. But fear had sewn a shroud of silence over it all. Late night in Marcus Thorne's office. The air conditioning whirred, a stark contrast to the electric tension emanating from the dual monitors. Caleb Vance, illuminated by the screen's glow, moved with the focused intensity of a surgeon, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Marcus, seated beside him, watched, a mixture of awe and grim satisfaction on his face. Okay, Caleb announced, his voice calm amidst the blizzard of data, cross-referencing David's encrypted files with public business registries and district procurement orders. Look, a complex web of interconnected entities bloomed on the screen. Shell companies with generic names, registered in different states, all linking back to a single parent corporation. One that mysteriously received inflated payments for shipping insurance on everything from cafeteria supplies to non-existent science equipment. "This is a masterpiece of obfuscation," Marcus murmured, his legal mind quickly grasping the intricate mechanics. Hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, siphoned through these phantom transactions. David wasn't just tracking corruption, he was mapping an entire criminal enterprise. Caleb scrolled, revealing more damning evidence. "And here are the invoices, all signed off by Principal Sterling and Chairwoman Thorne. The shipping insurance costs often exceed the value of the goods themselves, even for local deliveries." The fraud was far grander, far more audacious than Eliza had first imagined. The next morning, Eliza found her silver sedan exactly where she'd left it in the school parking lot. The suburban subdivision, usually a picture of placid normality, felt subtly menacing today. As she reached for her door handle, her eyes caught a small white rectangle tucked under the wiper blade. Her heart gave a sudden cold lurch. It wasn't a flyer. It was a note, handwritten in crude block letters. "Drop it, teacher. For your son's sake." The words were simple, yet they hit her with the force of a physical blow. They knew. They were watching. Eliza scanned the empty parking lot, the rows of cars, the distant, quiet school building. Every shadow, every glint of sunlight off a window, suddenly felt like a pair of eyes. The chill that ran down her spine wasn't from the morning air. It was the icy grip of fear, not for herself but for Caleb. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone, dialing Marcus's number. "They know, Marcus." They sent a warning. The aroma of burnt sugar and cheap coffee hung heavy in the air of the discreet coffee shop, a mundane backdrop for the dangerous conversation unfolding. Eliza sat opposite Maria, a former district accounting clerk whose darting eyes and fidgeting hands betrayed her profound fear. Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "David, Mr. Vance, he came to me. He knew. He suspected." Eliza leaned forward, her gaze steady, reassuring. "Suspected what, Maria?" "The invoices. The shipping insurance." It was all fake. Shell companies, inflated numbers. Principal Sterling, he would bring them to me, already signed by Chairwoman Thorne, just needing my stamp. If I questioned it, he'd say it was protocol. Then he'd mention my mortgage, my daughter's tuition. Subtle threats, but clear. Maria wrung her hands. "They said if I ever spoke a word, I'd lose everything. They'd make sure I never worked in this town again." Eliza's stomach churned with disgust and a fierce protective anger. Maria was a crucial witness, a direct link to the board's criminal activities. But the cost for her was immense. "Maria," Eliza said, her voice gentle but firm, "if you tell your story, we can protect you, and we can stop them." Maria swallowed hard, her eyes wide with terror. But a flicker of resolve ignited deep within them. The fluorescent lights of Eliza's empty classroom hummed, casting long, lonely shadows. The day had been a blur of forced smiles and cautious glances. Now, after hours, the silence was broken only by the insistent ring of her phone. "It was Maria," Eliza answered, a knot of dread tightening in her chest. "Eliza, I can't. I'm so sorry." Maria's voice was shaky, laced with a desperation that twisted Eliza's gut. "They found out. They said things. About my family. I'm leaving town. Tonight. They win, Eliza. You have to drop it. For your own sake." The line went dead. Eliza stared at her phone, the cold plastic feeling heavy in her hand. The words echoed in the quiet classroom, a testament to the board's ruthless power. They had eyes everywhere, ears in every corner. Maria's terrified recantation wasn't just a setback. It was a crushing blow, a stark reminder of her isolation. Eliza's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor. Her face, usually composed, contorted with a silent rage. She walked to her desk, her gaze falling on a framed photo of David, his gentle smile a ghost in the sterile room. "They think they've won," she whispered, her voice rough with raw emotion. "They think they've silenced us. But they don't know. They don't know what you left behind, David. And they don't know what a mother will do." The empty classroom suddenly felt vast and cold, but Eliza's resolve burned brighter than ever. The air in the storage unit, usually heavy with dust and the scent of forgotten things, now vibrated with a different kind of tension. Eliza, Caleb, and Marcus stood before David's makeshift desk, a relic of a life Eliza was only just beginning to understand. Following a cryptic hint from David's journal, a doodle of a labyrinth beneath a clock, Caleb's sharp eyes had found the almost imperceptible seam in the wall panel behind the desk. With a soft click, a section of the wall slid inward, revealing a small, deeply hidden compartment. Inside, bathed in the soft glow of indicator lights, sat a secure server. Beside it, a meticulously bound manual labeled simply, Contingency Plan. Caleb's breath hitched. Dad! He had a backup for everything. Eliza reached in, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the server, then the paper of the manual. Hope, sharp and unexpected, pierced through the weariness in her chest. David, her mild-mannered engineer, had been a strategizing phantom, orchestrating a final, posthumous gambit. Marcus Thorne, his initial skepticism long evaporated, simply shook his head in quiet admiration. Your husband, Eliza, was truly a man ahead of his time. The weight of David's final wishes settled upon Eliza. A legacy not of grief, but of a fight yet to be won. The storage unit, once a dusty testament to David's hidden life, had become a temporary command center. Caleb, a young maestro at the console, connected the secure server. Multiple screens, hastily set up, flickered to life, revealing the full, intricate web of David's genius. It's a network, Caleb explained, his voice alight with a mixture of awe and technical precision. Secure Dropboxes, anonymous leak sites, encrypted communication channels. He built it all to go public. Eliza watched, mesmerized, as Caleb navigated through the digital fortress. David had meticulously compiled his evidence, not just for a lawyer, but for the world. Financial ledgers, shell company registrations, recorded phone calls, all organized for a timed release. A digital clock on one screen showed a countdown, paused at David's last interaction. He designed it to bypass local influence, Caleb continued, pointing to a diagram showing data flows to national investigative bodies and independent media outlets. If he failed, if he was silenced, this would ensure the truth got out. Eliza felt a surge of empowering confidence. David hadn't just left her a fight, he'd left her the weapons to win it, designed for maximum public exposure and protection, leaving no stone unturned, no avenue for the corrupt to hide. The glowing screens of David's network cast long shadows across the storage unit, now a crucible of strategy. Eliza, Caleb, and Marcus huddled, the weight of their audacious plan settling heavily in the air. We use it, Eliza stated, her voice firm, eyes gleaming with cunning determination. We lure them into a public meeting. A place where they can't hide, can't control the narrative. Marcus nodded, already sifting through the legal implications. A public forum. We need to frame it as a discussion about the district's future. Something they can't refuse without raising suspicion. Caleb, ever the architect of their digital battlefield, added, and we link it to Dad's network. Hidden cameras, microphones, we capture their reactions, their private conversations, their panic denials, live. Eliza smiled, a sharp, confident curve that erased the last vestiges of the grieving widow. We don't just expose their crimes, Marcus. We force their confession. In front of everyone. The stakes were impossibly high, the risks immense, but the plan was set. The trap, meticulously crafted by a quiet man, was finally laid, ready to spring. Back in the quiet sanctuary of her home, the next day, Eliza sat before her laptop. The screen glowed with the draft of an anonymous email. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, a slight tremor, the only outward sign of the nerve-wracking gamble she was about to take. She carefully crafted the message, weaving in obscure financial details from David's files, details only someone deeply involved in the fraud, or David himself, would know. It wasn't a direct accusation. It was a subtle taunt, a whisper of imminent exposure. Subject, private discussion, Riverbend District legacy. The email's body spoke of unresolved financial discrepancies and a, quote, need for transparency regarding recent expenditures. Then, the bait, an invitation to a private, informal discussion at the Riverbend School District Auditorium, a public venue known for its ubiquitous CCTV cameras. "For your sake and the district's," she typed, a calculated flourish of menace. Eliza's internal monologue was a whirlwind of anticipation. Would they bite? Would their arrogance outweigh their caution? The email was sent, a single digital arrow loosed into the heart of the enemy. The waiting game had begun, and with it, the palpable sense of a gathering storm. The email landed like a poisoned dart in Principal Sterling's inbox. His face, usually a mask of forced geniality, blanched as he read the specific, damning details. "The shipping invoices. The shell companies," he muttered, his voice a panicked whisper. He immediately dialed Chairwoman Thorne, his hands trembling. Her initial dismissive scoff turned into a furious roar as the implications sank in. "Who is this? How do they know?" she shrieked, slamming her hand onto her polished desk. Frantic phone calls ensued, a montage of panicked faces flashing across the screen, worried board members, desperate denials, accusations flung across phone lines. "It has to be that Vance woman," Principal Sterling insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. "She's unhinged, grieving." But Chairwoman Thorne, her eyes narrowed with cold, calculating rage, knew better. No grieving widow writes like this. She's playing a game, and she just upped the stakes. The board, cornered and terrified of public exposure, made a unanimous decision. They would meet the anonymous sender. They would confront Eliza Vance. They would walk straight into the trap, utterly convinced they could control the outcome, their hubris paving the way for their inevitable downfall. The air in the Riverbend School District auditorium crackled with a tension thicker than the dust motes dancing in the stage lights. It was sparsely filled, mostly with a handful of concerned parents, a few curious teachers, and the sharp, expectant faces of local news reporters, their vans already parked conspicuously outside. Eliza Vance, a picture of calm resolve in a tailored black suit, walked onto the stage. Beside her, Marcus Thorne, his usual relaxed demeanor replaced by a lawyer's sharp focus, carried a briefcase that seemed to hum with contained secrets. Across the stage, seated behind a long table, the Riverbend School Board watched them approach. Chairwoman Thorne, imperious in a sapphire power suit, offered a tight, dismissive smile. Principal Sterling, though, seemed unable to hold her gaze, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow betraying the carefully constructed facade of casual confidence. Other board members shifted uneasily, a collective wariness replacing their usual smugness. They had taken the bait, but they had no idea of the hook. Eliza approached the podium, her voice steady, belying the storm of emotion swirling within her. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this special meeting." Her eyes swept over the board. "As many of you know, my late husband David Vance was a dedicated engineer and a father who deeply cared about the future of this district." She paused, letting David's name hang in the air, a silent challenge. "I'm here tonight to discuss his legacy and some concerning issues he uncovered before his untimely passing." Chairwoman Thorne's voice cut in, smooth as ice. "Mrs. Vance, we've extended our deepest condolences for your loss, but this is a public forum, not a platform for grieving. If you have a formal complaint, our office hours are clearly posted." Eliza met her gaze, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "Oh, I assure you, Chairwoman, this is a formal complaint. One that concerns a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme siphoning funds directly from our children's education." A gasp rippled through the small audience. Principal Sterling's forced smile vanished. The trap had sprung. As the board members began to sputter protests, Principal Sterling, rising halfway from his seat, Eliza's voice remained a calm counterpoint to their rising agitation. "I believe the word you're looking for is impossible, Principal Sterling. And perhaps you'd like to see asterisks why it's not." A low hum filled the auditorium, barely audible above the board's frantic whispers. The large presentation screens flanking the stage, previously displaying the school district logo, flickered. Then, with a sudden jarring switch, they came alive not with data but with a grainy live video feed. It was the auditorium's green room, moments before the meeting. Chairwoman Thorne, her face contorted in a sneer, was captured mid-sentence. "That grieving widow is no threat. she scoffed on screen, her voice amplified through the auditorium's sound system. "Just a nuisance. We'll dismiss her as hysterical, just like her husband." The audience gasped, a collective shockwave rolling through the room. On the actual stage, Chairwoman Thorne froze, her eyes wide with horror as she saw her own image, heard her own contemptuous words. Principal Sterling's face went white, his jaw dropping. Hidden backstage, Caleb Vance watched his monitor, a triumphant, almost fierce light in his eyes. His fingers, flying across the keyboard, had just activated David's network, broadcasting the hidden cameras he'd meticulously placed. This wasn't just a recording, it was a live, unedited peek behind the curtain of their arrogance. He'd named the file, "The Mic is Live." David would have been proud. Eliza, seeing the board's panic, stepped back slightly from the podium, allowing the damning footage to speak for itself. The screens then cycled to a different angle, showing Principal Sterling boasting, "I've handled Eliza's little attempts to gather support. No one will ever believe a word she says." The chaotic murmurs from the audience grew louder, reporters scrambling to capture every second of the unfolding disaster. The smug faces of the Riverbend School Board were now contorted in shock and dawning terror. Their carefully cultivated image was shattering, live, for all to see. Chaos erupted. Chairwoman Thorne, recovering from her initial shock, slammed her hand on the table. "Turn that off! This is an invasion of privacy! This is illegal!" Principal Sterling fumbled for his phone, likely trying to call for security, but the network was jamming their signals. Eliza, however, remained a beacon of calm. She stepped back to the podium, her voice cutting through the rising clamor like a scalpel. "Illegal? What's truly illegal, Chairwoman, is siphoning millions from our school budget. What's illegal is forging invoices for non-existent shipping insurance. What's truly illegal is threatening dedicated teachers and silencing concerned parents." As she spoke, Caleb's hidden network projected document after document onto the screens, each one a damning piece of David's meticulous investigation. Forged invoices for phantom shipments of textbooks and lab equipment flashed across the screen, each one approved with Chairwoman Thorne's signature, often countersigned by Principal Sterling. Bank statements appeared, tracing the money from district accounts to shell companies, then into personal accounts of board members. Even recorded phone conversations, captured by David's ingenious devices, played snippets of their cynical planning and veiled threats against whistleblowers. "These aren't just accusations," Marcus Thorne's voice boomed, stepping forward to stand beside Eliza, his legal expertise now fully engaged. "This is irrefutable evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering, charges that carry significant federal penalties." He pointed to a projected flowchart, David's handiwork, illustrating the complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. This wasn't a mistake. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise, designed to steal from the very children they were sworn to protect. Reporters, initially stunned, were now a frenzied mob, their cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward, capturing every detail of the board members' collapsing composure. Chairwoman Thorne's face was a mask of furious denial, but her eyes darted nervously between the screens and the audience, knowing her reign of terror was over. Principal Sterling buried his face in his hands. The truth, relentless and undeniable, was unraveling their entire world. Just as Chairwoman Thorne launched into a desperate, incoherent rant about character assassination, the auditorium doors burst open. A team of federal agents, crisp in their dark suits, poured in, their presence a silent, undeniable confirmation of the gravity of the situation. They moved with practiced efficiency, bypassing the stunned reporters and making a beeline for the stage. Chairwoman Eleanor Thorne, Principal Wallace Sterling, a lead agent, announced, his voice firm and clear, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit financial fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the auditorium as the agents secured the board members. Chairwoman Thorne, her face a contorted mask of fury and disbelief, struggled against their grip, her once commanding presence reduced to that of a common criminal. Principal Sterling, pale and shaking, offered no resistance, his eyes wide with a terror Eliza recognized as pure, unadulterated fear. Eliza watched it all, a quiet strength settling deep within her. The grief for David was still there, a dull ache, but now it was tempered by a profound sense of vindication. His work, his sacrifice, had not been in vain. From backstage, Caleb emerged, his face beaming with a mix of awe and fierce pride. He rushed to Eliza, wrapping his arms around her. "Mom, we did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Eliza hugged him tight, a rare smile gracing her lips. "No, honey, we did it. Your dad started it, but we finished it." She met his eyes, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The reporters swarmed, but Eliza and Caleb stood together, a small, unbreakable unit. Justice, long overdue, had finally been served, not through brute force, but through David's quiet brilliance and Eliza's unwavering courage. Later that evening, the Vances' suburban home, usually quiet and steeped in Eliza's melancholic routine, hummed with a different kind of peace. Eliza and Caleb sat close on the sofa, the soft glow of the television casting dancing shadows on the walls. News channels were awash with the Riverbend School District scandal, showing footage of the arrests, discussing the scale of the fraud, and praising the quote, unnamed whistleblower who brought it to light. Caleb leaned his head on Eliza's shoulder. "Dad would be so proud," he murmured, his voice soft. "And you, Mom, you were amazing." Eliza gently stroked his hair. "Your dad was the brave one, Caleb. He laid all the groundwork." She looked towards the mantel, where a framed photo of David, smiling, stood watch. "He believed in doing what was right, no matter the cost, and he loved us enough to fight for it." "He did," Caleb agreed, looking at the photo. "He always said his job was to build things that lasted. And he built this. For us." Eliza nodded, a tear tracing a path down her cheek, but it was a tear of release, not sorrow. "He wanted to protect us. That's why he did all of this." His love wasn't just a feeling, it was an action. It was his legacy. She held Caleb tighter, feeling the warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. The quiet courage David had embodied, the strategic intellect he'd wielded against corruption, now lived on in them. The fight was over, but a new beginning, fortified by truth and unwavering love, was just ahead. The house, once a place of quiet grief, now felt like a sanctuary, ready for a future built on integrity and strength. 6 months later, the Riverbend School District Board meeting room felt utterly transformed. No longer a stage for veiled threats and corrupt machinations, it now hummed with a quiet, constructive energy. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating a new, diverse panel of ethical board members. At the head of the polished table sat Eliza Vance, no longer the grieving widow, but a respected voice in the community, her posture confident, her eyes clear and resolute. Caleb, taller and more self-assured, sat beside her, his quiet competence a mirror of his late father's. "Our first proposal," Eliza began, her voice steady and articulate, addressing the new board, "is for a comprehensive digital transparency portal. All district expenditures, vendor contracts, and financial reports will be uploaded in real time, accessible to every parent, teacher, and taxpayer." She paused, allowing the weight of the statement to settle. No more hidden shell companies, no more inflated invoices. The new board members nodded, some exchanging appreciative glances. Marcus Thorne, now a familiar and trusted ally, offered a small, approving smile. Caleb, meanwhile, tapped quietly on a tablet, a series of complex dashboards and secure network schematics displayed across its screen. "I've built in multi-factor authentication and blockchain integration," he explained, his gaze directed at the board, but his words carrying David's methodical precision. "It's designed to be tamper-proof, with redundant backups. Any attempt to alter data will trigger an immediate alert to an independent oversight committee." The room felt lighter, filled with a collective purpose for the future. Justice had not only been served, it was being meticulously built into the very fabric of Riverbend. The eradication of corruption was not just a hope, but a tangible digital reality. The air in the bustling community center vibrated with excitement. Banners adorned with a stylized tree and the words, "The David Vance Foundation for Transparency and Education," hung proudly, a testament to a legacy reborn. Eliza stood at a podium, the microphone a familiar tool in her hand, her presence commanding attention from the diverse crowd of parents, teachers, and community leaders. Caleb stood a step behind her, a proud, silent guardian of his father's name. Marcus Thorne, beaming, watched from the front row. "My husband, David Vance," Eliza began, her voice resonating with warmth and conviction, "was an ordinary man who chose to do an extraordinary thing. He believed in truth, in justice, and in the power of ordinary people to stand up against what is wrong." A ripple of murmurs and nods went through the crowd. This foundation, established in his memory and guided by his unwavering spirit, is dedicated to empowering those who dare to speak out, to equip whistleblowers with the legal and technical support they need, and to foster a new generation of leaders who understand that true power lies in integrity, not in greed. She looked at Caleb, then swept her gaze across the assembled faces. "David taught us that silence is the greatest ally of corruption. Today we break that silence. We stand together, not just for Riverbend, but for every community where ordinary citizens are fighting for a brighter, more transparent future. We are proof that one person, with courage and a plan, can change everything." The community erupted in applause, a wave of hope and inspiration washing over the room. The foundation was more than an organization. It was a beacon, a promise that David's fight would continue to echo, empowering others long after his voice was silenced. Eliza's home, once a silent echo of grief, now hummed with a quiet contentment. It was a sanctuary, filled with the warmth of shared history and the promise of new beginnings. Caleb, now 18, moved through his bedroom, methodically packing boxes for college. His hands, once quick across a keyboard, now carefully folded close, his focused intensity still evident. He was bound for a prestigious university, a scholarship in forensic computing, his reward for his innate brilliance, and the skills honed in David's secret crusade. Eliza entered, carrying a small, worn object. "Ready for the next adventure?" she asked, a proud smile gracing her lips. Caleb grinned, a rare, easy expression. "As I'll ever be, though I think Dad would have had a contingency plan for dorm life." Eliza chuckled, then held out the object. It was David's old toy car, the one that had started it all. Its paint was chipped, its wheels loose, but it gleamed with unspoken significance. Caleb took it, turning it over in his hands, remembering the rattle, the hidden key. "This little guy started quite a journey," he mused. "It did," Eliza agreed, her voice soft. "And it's a reminder, Caleb, of your father's unwavering belief in truth and his love for us. That sometimes the smallest, most unassuming things hold the greatest secrets. And that the search for justice is a journey that never truly ends." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You carry his legacy now, his intellect, his determination. Use it wisely, my son." Caleb met her gaze, his own eyes reflecting a deep understanding and a quiet resolve. He nodded, clutching the toy car. He was ready. Eliza watched him go, a pang of bittersweet nostalgia in her heart, but overwhelmingly, a profound sense of pride. Her son, David's son, was stepping into a future they had both fought so hard to secure. Miles away, in a struggling school district in a neighboring town, a young teacher named Sarah slumped over a pile of ungraded papers. Her apartment was modest, her eyes tired, reflecting the constant battle against a system that seemed designed to fail. Her own school board was a shadowy echo of Riverbend's past, whispering about budget shortfalls while new, expensive contracts appeared for dubious services. She felt a familiar despair, a sense of being utterly alone in a fight too big for one person. She pushed aside the papers and scrolled idly through her laptop, seeking a distraction. A news article caught her eye. Riverbend School District Reforms, a Triumph for Transparency. She clicked, and Eliza Vance's face filled the screen, confident and articulate, discussing the David Vance Foundation. Sarah's internal monologue was a weary sigh. Another story of a hero. Another impossible dream. But, as she read on, Eliza's words about ordinary people, about quiet determination, about the strategic unraveling of a corrupt system, began to chip away at Sarah's cynicism. She found the David Vance Foundation website a clean professional portal offering resources, legal advice, and a secure channel for reporting corruption. A small, hopeful flame flickered within her. She wasn't alone. Eliza Vance, a teacher just like her, had faced seemingly insurmountable odds and won. Sarah's fingers hovered over the Contact Us button, a determined glint slowly replacing the weariness in her eyes. The ripple effect of Eliza's courage had reached her, offering not just inspiration, but a tangible path forward. Her own journey, a fight for justice in her own struggling community, was about to begin. Back in Riverbend, Eliza Vance stood before her vibrant high school classroom, a subtle, framed photo of David on her desk. The room buzzed with the eager energy of students, a stark contrast to the stifled atmosphere of the district's past. She was teaching a lesson on civic duty, on the power of the individual voice, and her words carried an authority that transcended the curriculum. Holding power accountable, Eliza explained, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her students, isn't just about grand gestures or dramatic revelations. It starts with paying attention, with questioning what doesn't feel right, with having the courage to speak up, even when it feels like your voice is just a whisper in a storm. She paused, a gentle, knowing smile playing on her lips. Sometimes, the most ordinary people in the most ordinary places discover they are capable of the most extraordinary things. They find a strength they never knew they possessed, and they learn that intellect, coupled with integrity, can be the most powerful weapon against injustice. She thought of the toy car, the hidden key, the secret storage unit, and the vast, intricate network David had built. She thought of Caleb, now off to college, carrying that same legacy. Finding your voice, she concluded, is the first step. The next is using it to build a world where everyone has the chance to be heard, and where truth always finds a way to shine. Eliza Vance, the mild-mannered teacher, was now a radiant beacon of confidence and peace. Her legacy was not just the reform district or the foundation, but the seeds of courage and critical thinking she planted in every student, ensuring that the fight for justice would continue, generation after generation. Eliza Vance slumped into her worn office chair, the glow of David's laptop casting a pale light on her tired face. Architectural drawings, network schematics, and code snippets covered her desk, a labyrinth of technical jargon that blurred into an indecipherable mess. David, her mild-mannered engineer, had been a ghost architect, building a digital fortress she barely understood. Frustration simmered, a bitter counterpoint to her grief. How could she fight a war when she couldn't even read the battle plans? "Mom?" Caleb's voice, soft but alert, cut through her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the hall light. "Still at it?" Eliza sighed, pushing a hand through her hair. I don't get it, Caleb. All these layers, these protocols. It's like he designed it for someone else." Caleb walked over, his eyes quickly scanning the screens. "He designed it for Chiss, Mom. For when he couldn't." He settled beside her, pointing to a complex diagram. "See here? This isn't just a firewall. It's a metamaterial composite, shield. Blocks ground-penetrating radar. And this section? Signal absorption." He knew they'd be looking for digital footprints. Eliza watched, a knot in her chest easing. Caleb, her quiet, tech-savvy son, was the key to unlocking David's genius. Miles away, in the plush, sterile confines of Principal Sterling's office, the air crackled with a different kind of tension. Sterling paced, the expensive leather of his shoes squeaking faintly on the polished floor. "She's persistent, Thorne, more so than we anticipated." Chairwoman Thorne's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the phone line. "Persistent? She's a widowed teacher, Sterling, grieving. She'll exhaust herself eventually. It's a tragic story, nothing more." "She's been asking questions," Sterling insisted, running a hand over his thinning hair. "Poking around the budget, talking to former staff, Maria almost broke." A dangerous silence stretched. "Maria was handled," Thorne finally said, her tone hardening. "And so will Eliza Vance, you understand? This isn't about some petty school budget, Principal. This is about our legacy, our control. Handle her. Discreetly, of course. Remind her of her place. Remind her of her son." Sterling felt a chill, but a menacing smirk touched his lips. Thorne was right. They were untouchable, and Eliza Vance was about to learn that. The next morning, the staff lounge buzzed with the usual pre-class chatter, but Eliza felt an invisible spotlight on her. Principal Sterling entered, his smile too wide, his eyes sweeping the room before settling on her. "Ah, Eliza," he began, his voice dripping with false concern. "Just wanted to check in. I've noticed a certain distraction in your recent performance reviews." Other teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances, quickly looking away. "We understand grief can be consuming, but the students, you see, they rely on our full attention. Perhaps you need some time off? A sabbatical, perhaps." Eliza met his gaze, her own unwavering. "My students are my priority, Principal Sterling. Always have been. My focus is entirely on their education." Her voice was calm, but inside a fierce defiance burned. They weren't just threatening her. They were trying to dismantle her career, her very identity. They wanted to isolate her, to make her feel alone. But she wasn't. She had David's legacy. She had Caleb. And she had Marcus. The sting was real, but so was her resolve. Marcus Thorne's office felt like a war room. Papers were strewn across his desk, but his movements were precise, his voice a low, confident murmur as he worked the phone. He was a master chess player setting up his pieces. "Brenda, my friend," he said into the receiver, a subtle shift in his tone. "I'm hearing whispers about Riverbend. Rumors of significant financial irregularities. Nothing concrete, of course, but enough to make a good journalist curious, wouldn't you say?" He paused, listening. "Excellent. Look for shipping insurance, anomalies, shell companies, inflated invoices. And keep my name out of it for now." He hung up, then dialed another number. "Judge Reynolds? Marcus Thorne here. I'm preparing a rather sensitive case. It might involve some high-profile individuals. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Possible federal implications." He secured commitments for extensive media coverage and legal attention, ensuring that when the truth finally exploded, the Riverbend board wouldn't be able to sweep it under the rug. The pieces were moving into place. Later that evening, in the quiet sanctuary of their kitchen, Eliza found a moment of respite. Caleb sat across from her, a half-eaten sandwich forgotten on his plate. "Are you scared, Mom?" he asked, his young eyes surprisingly perceptive. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. "A little. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking into a hurricane. But then I think of your dad. How he never backed down from what was right. How he faced all of this alone for so long." A tremor ran through her voice. "And I think about you, about the kind of world I want you to grow up in. One where people like Thorne and Sterling don't get away with stealing from our schools." Caleb reached across the table, taking her hand. His grip was firm. "Dad wasn't alone, Mom. He had us. And you're not alone now. We're doing this together. For him, for us." His quiet strength was a balm, a reminder that their purpose was greater than their fear. Eliza squeezed his hand, a glimmer of hope rekindling in her heart. They would fight this, for David, for Riverbend, for their future. The storage unit, now a makeshift command center, hummed with a nervous energy. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and new resolve. Hours before the public forum, Eliza, Caleb, and Marcus moved with focused intensity, each performing their part in David's elaborate trap. Caleb's fingers flew across the keyboard, his brow furrowed in concentration. Encrypted feeds, double-checked, hidden cameras, perfect signal, live broadcast linked to all major news outlets, ready? They won't even know what hit them. Eliza reviewed her notes, her presentation meticulously crafted from David's raw data. She practiced her calm, authoritative tone, knowing her composure would be their most potent weapon. Marcus, meanwhile, was on a final call, his voice low and urgent. "The press pool is confirmed. Federal agents are aware of unusual activity expected. They'll be ready to move in." The tension was a palpable thing, a coiled spring ready to release. Eliza looked at her son, then at Marcus. It was time. In the auditorium's small, stuffy green room, the Riverbend school board members exuded an almost comical arrogance. Chairwoman Thorne, impeccably dressed, sipped tea with an air of absolute control. "Honestly, Sterling, you worry too much. This Eliza Vance is a non-entity, a grieving widow seeking attention. We simply dismiss her claims, present our transparent financials, and this whole charade blows over." Principal Sterling chuckled, patting his perfectly coiffed hair. "Indeed, Chairwoman, I've already ensured she's isolated. Planted a few seeds of doubt among her colleagues about her mental state. She won't have any credibility." Another board member guffawed. "So, a quick public rebuke, then back to business as usual?" "Precisely," Thorne affirmed, her lips curving into a smug smile. "These peasants always underestimate us. They think a few whispers can shake the foundation we've built." They rose, straightening their expensive suits, confident in their power, completely unaware they were walking into a meticulously constructed cage. Their downfall, unseen but imminent, would be all the more spectacular. The Riverbend School District Auditorium, usually a venue for student plays or parent-teacher conferences, felt like a courtroom. Eliza stood at the podium, a quiet figure in a simple, elegant dress, facing the imposing line of board members. Principal Sterling and Chairwoman Thorne sat front and center, their smiles fixed, but a flicker of wariness in their eyes. "Good morning," Eliza began, her voice calm and clear, carrying effortlessly through the hushed room. "My name is Eliza Vance, and I'm here today to discuss the financial health of our school district." She projected David's meticulously organized data onto the large screens, starting with seemingly innocuous figures, budget allocations, vendor lists, minor discrepancies in shipping costs. "For instance," she continued, pointing to a graph, "our insurance premiums for school supplies have inexplicably risen by 300% in the last 2 years, despite a decrease in actual shipments." Principal Sterling's forced smile began to falter. Chairwoman Thorne's posture stiffened. The audience, initially skeptical, leaned forward, sensing the controlled power in Eliza's quiet accusations. The first crack in the board's arrogant facade had appeared. Chairwoman Thorne, her face tightening, leaned into her microphone. "Mrs. Vance, these are baseless insinuations. You're clearly misinterpreting public data. This is a distraction from your own." "Is it?" Eliza cut in, her voice unwavering. "Or is it the truth you've worked so hard to bury?" She pressed a button on her remote. The large screens, which had shown data, now displayed an audio waveform. Then, a familiar voice filled the auditorium. David's. "Thorne, this is beyond inflated invoices. These shipping insurance contracts are pure fiction. Sterling, you're complicit in this. You're stealing from the children. David's voice, clear and resolute, detailed a conversation between Sterling and Thorne, outlining the fraud and their plans to silence him. The board members froze, their faces contorted in horror. Principal Sterling looked as if he'd seen a ghost. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, followed by a stunned, then outraged, silence. The auditorium erupted. Shouts of "Fraud!" and "Arrest them!" filled the air, drowning out the board's desperate, sputtering denials. The audience, initially apathetic or skeptical, was now a roaring tide of fury, their trust betrayed, their children's futures stolen. Reporters who had been politely taking notes surged forward, cameras flashing, microphones thrust towards Eliza. "Mrs. Vance, can you confirm the authenticity of this recording?" one shouted. "How long have you known about this?" another pressed. Eliza stood tall, a beacon of calm amidst the storm. "My husband, David Vance, uncovered this corruption. He died trying to expose it. Today we simply finished his work." She looked at the board members, now shrinking figures against the backdrop of public outrage, their power broken, their carefully constructed world crumbling. They were cornered, exposed, and finally defeated. The collective power of the people, galvanized by truth, had shattered their tyranny. Weeks later, a soft spring breeze rustled the leaves around the Riverbend School District entrance. The imposing, official sign was gone, replaced by a new, hopeful one. Riverbend Community Schools, dedicated to transparency and excellence. Eliza, Caleb, and Marcus stood before it, a quiet trio united by a shared victory. Caleb, taller now, a budding engineer, adjusted his glasses, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Marcus, ever the stoic lawyer, allowed himself a small, proud nod. Eliza looked at her son, then at the new sign, a testament to David's sacrifice and her own unwavering strength. The The sky above was a bright, clear blue, promising a new beginning.